Hi, it's Doc Edwards back for a One Belly, Two Brains Wednesday, and I wanted to talk to you today specifically to those moms who have had babies recently who might be fussy or crying or tough to settle down after the birth. So earlier this week, I had the opportunity to take care of a little patient, and he was born by surgical birth. He was 3 weeks old when I met him, and for the last 3 weeks, he has had a really tough time being able to settle himself down. He's had a really difficult time nursing. He's had a hard time with the breast. Just when mom would hold him, he seemed always uncomfortable, and he would make a cry that I associate with a pain cry. Now, that pain cry sounds different than the ones that we usually talk about hunger or tiredness or uncomfortable because I've got upper gas, lower gas, or I don't like the bunny costume you set me in. Yeah. This is a different kind of cry that is a lot like if you can imagine if a baby has a constant headache and it's not stopping, that it's trying to get out to you. And when I saw him, there were two big things that I noticed right away. We call this in pediatric chiropractic KISS syndrome, which is the kinematic imbalance of the spine syndrome. And KISS syndrome was originally discovered by a researcher named Biederman, who's a medical doctor, and it has some very, very clear indicators. I have my baby Mabel here to kind of show you what happens. With KISS syndrome, those babies look like they're looking up all the time. They have their heads tilted back this way, and sometimes it's tilted back and off to the side. Now, one of the things that we talk about a lot in this office is about how sometimes birth can cause an injury into the brain that we call a subdural hematoma. Very good study that was done years ago that looked at babies who didn't have any symptoms. They were asymptomatic for subdural hematomas, and yet on MRI they had them. 40% of these babies, whether they're vaginally born or surgically born, had some form of subdural hematoma. That's a lot. And according to their research, at 2 years and 5 years, these babies didn't have any long-term problems, but I always ask the question, why do some babies crawl earlier than others? It's all about function. So when I see this, it gives two big indicators for me as a chiropractor to let me know we do have a problem with those cortical firing neurons. Problem number one is that it increases flexor tone. And the flexors that I'm looking for a baby connect the back of the head to the collarbone. When those pull, what ends up happening is the baby looks like this. Tips the head. That muscle shortens, it contracts, and so what you have is a baby who's usually looking up like this. The second thing that happens is the baby's in a state of fight-flight. It knocks out that automatic rest and digest system that the baby ought to be working through, instead puts the baby in fight-flight. That starts showing up as a tough time being able to digest the food, difficult time sleeping or settling, and a really enhanced moral response. Moral response is the reflex that a baby will have. If you tip them backwards, those arms go flaring out to the side. So this baby, he had a really hypertonic moral response, which told me big fight flight. He had the problem where you hold on to his hands and you lift him up, and his head seems like it was lagging back, but that's not a weakness in the neck. What that is it's a spasm of the muscles because the brain appears not firing well. Now, the other thing that he had when I would tip him side to side is that on the one side here, his body would right itself. We call this the spinal galant vestibular component reflex, where these little baby wrinkles come up. You stroke the back of the baby on this right side. Again, he had those wrinkles come up. But you do the left side, and that it wasn't working. Now, those reflexes there, on one hand, can be a cortically driven process. It can be that the brain has high flexor tone. Again, these muscles here are flexors, and that might be why we're seeing it. But the other reason is because these are also brainstem related reflexes, is that his skull would be pressing in like this. Now, I'll tell you, that specific misalignment, I don't see a lot in my office. We call that in chiropractic an AS occiput, and those kinds of subluxations, those kinds of areas of misalignment, put a ton of pressure on the back part of the brainstem. Usually those babies got severely hurt during the birth. So let me tell you his birth story, and you can figure out where it came from. So he's in his mom's pelvis like this, but he's not descending. So they strip the membranes and try to get her water to break, and that doesn't work. So the next thing they do is they try to give her Pitocin, and she's on Pitocin for like a full 24 hours. Still didn't work. So what they did then at that point in time, with baby wedged in like this, is that they took him and did the surgery here, then used a vacuum to get his head up and out in order for him to be born, like that. I will tell you, since the time I've been in practice here, I have not had the opportunity to work with many babies who have needed a vacuumed assisted surgical delivery. That's a ton of pressure on a baby's head and neck. And so no wonder he was screaming and crying. Now, what did we do with him? The very first thing that I did, the adjustments for a baby are completely different than an adjustment for an adult. Mostly there's so much space in between the vertebra, and the vertebra are mostly cartilage at this point in time, that you don't need the same kinds of pressures at all. And so what I did for him is, as I checked him and unwound his spine, I literally was holding him just like this. And all I had to do was apply as much pressure and traction as I'd use on a real ripe tomato before I would go through the skin. That first little unwinding that we did was designed to help bring his skull from being jammed in like this to getting it to be more like this. His very first night after we adjusted him, he had 2 5-hour sleep blocks. He'd gone from 3.5 hours co-sleeping, any little nudge or wiggle would startle him awake, to being able to sleep for 5 hours in 2 of those blocks. I'm still waiting to find out what happened the second time after the second visit, but I'll tell you what happened in my office. He's been this baby who has been crying nonstop for 3 weeks. My front desk person said, gosh, I didn't really hear him cry at all. Is he the same baby? When I was adjusting him, again, working on those same areas, what happened is he started relaxing his arms. Again, that's flexor tone, something he would always do. He'd fall asleep with his arms up like this. He relaxed his arms so they would lay down at his side, and he fell asleep in my hands. So that tells me a couple things. One is that I'm not doing any magic. What I'm doing is chiropractic care the way that it's taught to pediatric chiropractors. We're trained to look for these kinds of misalignments, these kinds of subluxations, and birth trauma happens. I mean, if it didn't, even in vaginal births, if it didn't, we wouldn't have 40% of these babies having some form of subdural hematoma. That pressure that comes through the birth canal, or comes through after a baby's been trying to get down, but then has to get pulled out, needs to get checked afterwards. Now, this mom has had the best access to care. I really love, she has a family member who's a very, very good coworker of mine. She is we work together on a lot of cases, and even she was looking at this baby going, man, something's not right here. I think I ought to give Doc a call because I want a second opinion on this. One of my very dear friends, who's a lactation consultant, was looking at him and going, well, the latch kind of looks okay. I don't really see where the issue's coming from, but everybody knew something wasn't right with this baby. The pediatrician looks at this baby and says, well, the in-hole and out-hole are connected. All the organs are there. I don't know, maybe you just have colic or reflux. Let's prescribe you some medication for this, for the silent reflux. But the root cause of this happens at the brainstem. It happens in there, inside the brain. It happens in the nerve system. And chiropractic's role is being able to get to the source of that, help unlock the subluxation, open up the channels of communication between the brain and the body so that baby can now be more adaptable. So it can grow, so it can allow the system that's supposed to guide digestion and rest, and most importantly, the immune system, to fire and function the best way it possibly can. So, One Belly Wednesday, what we're doing here is we're talking about cases that happen here at Mama's Chiropractic, sharing some information and evidence for new parents, for people who choose conscious parenting paths. We'd like you to subscribe to our Facebook page, Mama's Chiropractic. Always, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to check that out as well. And if you're a member of our practice, remember that we're sending out email newsletters to keep in touch with you. So make sure that you're subscribed to our Jane account.